Alfred Russel Wallace and his contributions to science. Alfred Russel Wallace is known for his breakout idea of evolution by natural selection, which differs from famous scientist and naturalist Charles Darwin, who was known as the father of evolution. Darwin focused more on the overall fitness of the species and its ability to survive, seen as the edge to compete in a challenging environment. At the same time, Wallace focused more on the environmental pressure that forced species to adapt to the environment. Wallace's idea heavily challenged prevailing creationists and introduced a new way of analyzing species. This is one of the reasons why today we can break down such adaptations from species and see how they have evolved. Alfred Wallace and his upcoming. Alfred Russel Wallace was born in 1823 in Wales in the United Kingdom to a middle-class family. His father was a land surveyor, and Wallace faced minimal education but loved to read, especially on the topic of natural history. With a lack of education and his love to read, Wallace was self-taught, relying on books and observations. With his interest in nature, especially towards animals and plants, he began his career as a naturalist. Wallace was driven by a desire to understand the diversity of life on Earth. He traveled a lot in the early stages of scientific work and it played a big role in his scientific development, including a trip to the Amazon in 1848 in Southeast Asia. In his journey to South America through the Amazon, Wallace was exposed to a new environment full of new species. He was able to gather information about important findings that would later lay the foundation of his idea for biogeography, which was crucial to his evolutionary work. In his journey to the Malay archipelago, he was able to recognize patterns and differences of species. To Wallace, he was able to conclude how the environment can influence a species. This led to Wallace proposing ideas of the origin and development of species through his journey. The overall seen as the most influential journey Wallace had allowed. Natural selection. Wallace's early adventures and observations led him to question the variation and change between species over time. Although he was not the only scientist who was interested in variation between species, other scientists like Charles Lyell and Thomas Malthus heavily influenced Wallace, with Lyell proposing gradual geological changes and Malthus in his writings over competition between species and the effect of their population, helping aid Wallace in the formation of his idea. These ideas led Wallace to consider how species might adapt to environmental pressures through competition and selection. Wallace proposed the Sarawak Law in 1855, which stated that species vary within range and distinct variations occur in isolated areas. This law was seen as a building block for Wallace's theory of evolution, and in 1857 he sent Charles Darwin a letter in which he outlined his theory of natural selection. The letter outlined species evolving through competition and adaptation regarding the environment. The letter led to Wallace and Darwin presenting their ideas at the Linnean Society in 1858. The first introduction of the theory of natural selection. Wallace's version of natural selection was similar to Darwin's, but not the same. Wallace saw natural selection as the primary mechanism of evolution, emphasizing the importance of the environment, stating that new species could arise from isolated populations, which became a key concept in biogeography. Wallace's later views. After Wallace's groundbreaking discovery of natural selection, he became interested in human evolution. Natural selection, his big breakout theory, only seems to relate to animals and not humans, and it sparked Wallace's interest in humans, introducing the idea that the human mind and consciousness cannot be explained by natural selection. The limits of natural selection to explain human existence in all its aspects led Wallace to focus on spiritualism. In doing so, Wallace argued that natural selection played a role in human development, but human intelligence and morality cannot be explained by natural selection. Wallace suggested that human consciousness is influenced by a higher power or divine force, and after experiencing personal losses, Wallace argued that there might be evidence for spiritual phenomena, which led him to becoming an advocate for spiritualism, which is communicating with spirits. Once again, the observations and findings were controversial and challenged the scientific community, but Wallace considered spiritual experiences something that could be studied scientifically. His work on spiritualism closed the gap between science and mysticism, and this complex way of thinking forced many to think about such questions. Wallace is renowned for his discoveries and development of the theory of natural selection. Coming from a middle-class family in Wales, his adventures through the Amazon and Southeast Asia allowed him to observe species and their variation through their environment. Aligning ideas with Darwin over natural selection and emphasizing geographic factors and isolation, later became an advocate for spiritualism after his gain of interest in human nature. Outlining that human consciousness and morality could not be solved through natural selection. In conclusion, Alfred Russel Wallace was an important scientist who would live down in history books for his discoveries that helped shape the idea of evolution into what it is today.